Right after learning how to draw a decent human, most people realize that there's something else you might want to learn how to draw. Because drawing objects like weapons, pendants, skulls, armor, and many more things is what makes your art look more believable. Believe me, you don't want to be that guy. So here's a guide on how to draw every item, object, and weapon that you would want to. You know what's funny? I've given a lot of workshops over the years, teaching people how to draw better, and what most of you guys struggled with was drawing the simplest object. It's literally what you just saw before. Everyone's focusing on drawing characters, and yet everything else is very lackluster and wobbly. And believe me, especially in mediums like comic or manga, you always have to make things like weapons and armor look top-notch. And don't worry if you're bad at this, because just like the people from my workshop improve within not even an hour, I can also teach you how to draw. Like a son. Okay, so here are these steps to draw basically everything. First, you try to nail the proportions of your object, meaning you try to narrow down very roughly which part is going to be what size. Kind of like drawing in a silhouette. The second step is, if you haven't by now, getting at least one decent reference ASAP. Because drawing without a reference would be like spelling the name Marcel without an M. The third step is called basic shape design. You already know what this is about if you watched my previous videos, if you're a subscriber, and if you're not a subscriber, then you know what to do. Shape design is all about taking your reference and mentally trying to break it apart into its very basic shapes, so it's easier to draw that way. And since you already kind of marked the proportions, you know roughly what needs to go where. The most challenging part here is to draw all of this not two-dimensional, but rather three-dimensional. More on that later in the video. Now, the fourth step is obvious. If you're done drawing your items roughly, you can now go into detail. Try shaping this rough silhouette to look more like the item that you're actually referencing. And if you're now wondering what kind of exotic erasers and pencils I'm using here, don't worry, they are all listed in my art supply list on my website, which you would have already known if you were a subscriber. Okay, this last step is optional, but you might want to shade your artwork, add hatching, texture, or details. There are many ways to add details and shadow. I could list off 3 different ways to shade and highlight the blade. It's completely fine if this is too hard for you and you can't do this on your own, because next up is a draw along part where I show you all of these steps in detail. This part right here is to just quickly show you all of the steps. I'll be trying to teach you this through the power of editing. Because as you saw before, all of my videos are animated, so you guys understand all of this a lot better. And if you actually want to learn how to do editing and making videos and animations yourself, well, I can recommend Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning platform with thousands of classes. I've used Skillshare several times now. I've watched a lot of classes by Jake Barley and Kurzgesagt. Yes, the Kurzgesagt. All of these are industry professionals, so I literally learned animating from the best creators there are. Especially expressions are something I really needed some help with, because you wouldn't expect that you would need a tiny bit of coding skills in order to make animations professionally. And especially these 2 classes are a big recommend here. And don't worry if you're not a native English speaker, because all of these classes have subtitles. So if I wanted to, I could even watch them in Spanish, Portuguese, obviously English, and most importantly, Dutch. But in case you don't care much about video editing, Skillshare obviously has classes about basically everything, be it photography or painting, art, animation, writing classes for your own stories, and so much more. And it's free! For 1 month, if you're quick. The first 500 people to use my link in the info box or scan this QR code will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Now let's try and draw an object together. This next step is a draw along part, so don't worry, you won't need more than just the usual pencil, eraser, and obviously paper. You already saw me drawing a sword before, so let's do something different here. This video is about drawing items in general and not only weapons, but I got a nice idea by reading Gachiakta. Sorry, I mean Gachiakuda. It's a manga where people use everyday items as weapons, so this is a nice place for inspiration and also a nice middle ground, so I'm not only drawing weapons in this video. The scissors here look especially dope, so let's draw a pair of scissors in action, just like you would see in a manga page. Now, if I'm too fast for you, which happens sometimes, just remember you can always adjust the playback speed of this video. And while drawing, obviously keep the steps in mind. The first step is we start by figuring out the dimensions of our object. So mainly where our object starts, where it ends, etc. Just marking down important landmarks. Now, I already did collect some references, but yeah, this is the point where you absolutely need one if you haven't already. Or you just look at the references that I put here on screen. Now let's build this thing bit by bit. For beginners, this could be the hardest part, because you're not only separating your items into shapes and place them, but you also have to draw these shapes 3D instead of just drawing some flat lines. As always, you can tell if your object has volume by dividing it into more or less equal parts. So yeah, it doesn't matter which part of these scissors you draw, there's always another layer to be added to make it look 3D. If this actually is the part where you have problems, I did make a whole video on practicing shape design with some very easy examples so you can improve your 3D shapes a bit. It's linked on the top right corner, just give it a try if you're struggling here. And then, well, this object isn't very detailed, so you can always just refine some details or correct some shapes if they look off. But there's not much you need to correct when it comes to the shape. Okay, so how do we get detailed, especially with such a simple item? You can always add details to every item by adding some very simple hatching. Let's take the sword from the beginning as an example. Again, what I did here was just mentally dividing this item into equal parts, and then adding some shading that follows exactly these lines. That's it. That's how you add a very basic version of cross-hatching. So, what does this mean for our pair of scissors? Well, mentally divide it into equal parts, and you now have an idea where you could add some very simple hatching. I would recommend going easy and just add enough so that the shape of your item becomes more obvious. But you could always go very detailed here. Especially cross-hatching can deliver some really impressive results, no matter the item or subject. Maybe check out my tutorial on it sometime. Now, just for fun, I'll add another last step dedicated to the shining of the metal. Like with the sword before, you could totally add this very stylized anime shine effect and call it a day. If you want to get a bit more realistic with this texture though, you could always just imagine a point where the sunlight could hit and then hatching / shading the rest of it. That's also how I did it with the sword from before, and this approach should work for most metal surfaces. Anyways, that's how you can basically draw any object in just 5 steps. And here's a cheat sheet for you to screenshot with all of these steps on it. The only thing I would want for you in return is for you to subscribe. A like would be great in exchange. You can go ahead and screenshot away if you like this video. Thanks so much for watching, and be sure to check out my video on cross-hatching if you want to get more into detail. Or maybe check out all of my tutorials. By now I've made a video on basically everything. Well then, see you guys next time.